Hi, my name is Didier. I'm the founder and CEO of OpenBB. And today I'm going to show you what is possible to do on our workspace. We are doing this demo for a hedge fund. And so I thought, why not just making one that I can share with others? So this is the first view that you see when you come onto the workspace. This is what we call essentially applications. When you click on one of those applications, you basically enter into a dashboard that is editable and configurable. So you can move things around as you see fit. So you can move things around. You can change parameters. You can see that these guys are like grouped together. They're aligned to group number 6. You can see that if I change the parameter in here, it will actually update it in others here. These ones is that you can switch between the chart mode and the tab mode. And you can also have like Plotly charts and things of that nature. And then the nice part here, we have the AI Copilot that has access to it. We have some main functionalities of the AI Copilot. Right now, it's just the web search turned on. There's some MCP turned on, which I'm going to show you in a second. But basically, I want to do this one. Fetch my top 3 portfolio exposures by industry and scan the news headlines using the web for the last week for those industries. Is there any news indicating a game-changing issue? If you think so, advise me on rebalancing ideas. Create a memo following these guidelines. Is a summary, a section for each industry ordered by their weight in my portfolio. Within each section, 2 subsections, good versus bad. Within each subsection, no more than 3 bullets, and a recommendation section. And of course, you can tweak this as much as you'd like for your specific use case. Throughout the process of the AI Copilot, you're going to get the step-by-step reasoning. So you can see that it's actually running like SQL queries. Here, you can also extend the Copilot mode so that you have full screen. We like to call it the focus mode just because you are focused on getting this specific task done. Yeah, and that's supported. You also can use this mode here to add things into context. So if you wanted to specify which widgets you wanted the Copilot to use, right now you will understand which ones because he understands all the metadata associated with them. But you could also utilize this tab here to click here, for instance, and it gets added into the context right here. So in this case, like we don't care, it's processing already what we have. So that's perfect. And so you can see it highlights like what he used from the web. And it also highlights what was the main widget that was utilized. So I can over here and I can say, okay, show me actually these widgets. And you could see the overlying lay. And you'll see that here, there's the name, there's a description, and there's a category, subcategory. And that's what we call the metadata. And that's how the agent understands what it needs to do. Then one thing that I want to do here on this flow is actually, I want now to send these as an email to myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here onto our MCP server configuration. I'm going to make sure that we are connected with the email. Let me just refresh my browser. Allegedly, we should be connected. There we go. We're connected, 64. And you can see that I have access to the tool, like you will create a draft and delete drafts and whatnot. So I'm going to say, send this memo as an email to didier.lopsch@openbb.finance. Let's see what the agent does. As you can see, it has access to 64 different MCP tools. So it's up to the agent to decide what to do. And the complexity that the agent is solving here is quite high because it has access to all the data on this dashboard. It has access to past history, and it has access to the web search and all the MCP tools. So you have to decide like, okay, what it is most relevant for me right now, based on the query that the user has done. So right now you can see that he's decided, he's created a draft email, and you could review the draft if you wanted, but I'll just say just ship it. And you should have another tool that's basically, reviewed, please send it. So you didn't get that, just ship it meant yes. Anyway, here we are. We should have an email on my inbox now. Let me refresh this page. There we go. Portfolio, industry exposure, and news memo. Of course, like this can be improved, the styling, but it's basically all the context that it was there, which is great because it's essentially what I wanted. Going back into the workspace, let's say that you actually wanted to have these available on the dashboard right now, because I mean, it's all related to this specific tab, actually. So you can actually create widgets from texts, tables, charts, anything that are added back onto the dashboard. So I could create it directly here, and I can actually remove the controls from the bottom. And now let's say that I'm happy with what I have. So I want to share this with someone with my team. So I can come here, and then I can add the name of someone on my team. and they have access to that dashboard, which would appear on the shared with me on their site, so that they can then look into the data here. And this becomes essentially a markdown node. So I could actually edit things and have control over the information that is available here. What if you wanted a bit more customizability? Let's say that you actually want to add a few more things onto the dashboard. So let's add here, let's say that we want to add like CPI data. So I can add the CPI tab. And in this case, I'm actually going to use the widgets created by someone from the community on CPI. Let's say CPI scenario trend, term change, well, this one, and inflation momentum is perfect. So you'll see that these here are Plotly charts. They've been created by Kak from the community. To like different things is basically just relying on Plotly. The support for dark mode too. So he understands when the workspace is in dark mode and he updates like accordingly. So this allows you to keep your own branding. You can also send the underlying data if you want, because the Copilot now has actually access to this data. So you can do interesting things on top of it. But now we're going to show you this other feature that we have. So global data means that the Copilot has access to all of the widgets here. So right now I have 588 connected to this workspace environment. So it has access to all of those, but I want something else. I want generative UI. Generative UI gives the Copilot access to your dashboard. And right now is simple in the sense that it's adding widgets. It's changing the parameters of widgets. But in the future, we see this as more of an interactive analyst that lives on the workspace by you and can resize the dashboard, can create content like on the fly. And that's the direction we're heading towards. So right now, I'm going to say, let's say, add management team of Tesla to this dashboard. And so there's a widget that is called management team. And so it needs to pick up that's the widget I want. And it needs to pick up that I want it the ticker Tesla to be used and not something else from the prompt. And so it just sends the right parameters. Here you have, which is perfect, which is exactly what I was looking for. Now, let's say that you actually want to create a bar chart with the compensation. So I could do something like, I'm going to say management team. And is this the one I want? I can hover and say, yes, that's the one I want. And then I say, create a bar chart with compensation of top executives. And it has access to the underlying data of the widget. And you can see that it's requesting the widget data. So you get all the steps that are happening under the hood. There you go. Once you have this bar chart, then what you can do is actually, as I said, all of these can be added as artifacts onto the workspace. And now you can go to see the raw view, or you can even go onto chart settings and you can change the configuration if that is what you want. And now you're asking, okay, where does these colors come from, right? And that's actually part of an enterprise feature, which is the team settings that you have here. And on the team settings, you can essentially modify the colors of the table, the background color, the foreground color, and things like that, but also the charts one. And so this is the main one that's the team chart is following by default. And so you can select the ones that make sense for your firm. We also have like the main branding color, which is, if you realize, if you look at the products, the main color that we have is kind of this bluish. So there's three main colors: is the lighter blue and the darker blue. You can change those to according to what you want, and also the logo if you are running OpenBB on-prem or VPC. It's part of our enterprise package. And then you also always have the citation. So you can always like fall back to what was the underlying data that was used to produce this content. And so earlier we had the citations from the web that were utilized. In here you have the citations from the widgets along with the parameters. Origin is where the data comes from. So in this case, it's part of our sandbox package. Now, this was an example of an app. I want now to show you a different one. So let's clear this. Let's go on to this one, generic demonstration. So here it's kind of a similar case. There's price performance. I have price targets here. I have holdings, exposure by country, industry, holdings correlations. But I want to do something different here, which is I want to highlight the fact that you can do the same we were doing before, but with unstructured data. And in a way that ties it with structure, which I think is extremely powerful. So right now, let's say that you want to add this into context and you want to add all of these reports. And so let's go ahead and trigger this prompt. And so this prompt does the following. Take a look at my top 10 holdings of my portfolio. Which research reports appear most relevant given my holdings that I should read? Then continue with that most relevant report you recommend based on my holdings. Are any of my portfolio stocks mentioned in this report? If so, summarize the key takeaways. If no stock is specifically mentioned, you can summarize relevant talking points based on industry exposures. I have generate as personalized as possible summary of the research given my investments. So this is a fairly complex flow because it doesn't just rely on reading all of these three separate reports on consumer spending, biofuels, and technology, but it needs to correlate with what is my portfolio, which is what we saw on the other tab, in this tab here, around the data that I have. So it needs to look onto these top 10 holdings and then go back onto the research tab to understand, okay, now given that I know that, like what type of stocks those are. And so we can see here that it's cooking. It creates these artifacts, which can actually be added onto the dashboard if I want. It's just to show you like how it thought about things. And if it created something that can be added onto the dashboard, like a table. And here you can see that he's identifying the most relevant reports based on those, which in this case should be the technology ones. Okay. Seems we have something. Yeah, perfect. Gonna switch to light mode for now. And okay, so now what you can actually do, you can see which is the widget that is used. So when you over, you get what is being utilized and you see the over on top, but you can actually go to a specific reference. So it took me to the technology page and it highlighted reaching over 1.3 trillion by the end of 2024. And it actually highlights where in the document is visible, which is super powerful. And in the end, you have all the citations. So you have holdings, which is where did we get the top 10 holdings? And when you over, you see what gets highlighted is actually the tab here, my portfolio, because that's where the widget is. So when you click Go tab, you are going to be routed to that tab and scrolling down to the specific widget. So you can actually analyze whether this is a correct statement. So in this case, you can see that it matched with Broadcom and video text instrument AMD Qualcomm. And that's why it used mostly the technology investment research report. So another thing I want to show you now, and I'm gonna remove this chart here. I'm gonna add this other widget that I have, semiconductor, multiples database. And this one has access to a specific database that I have. And this is what we call our Omni widget. And basically it can take any input as text, and as output, it can produce a table, a chart, or text, essentially. And you can see here that is a run button. This is a post instead of a get. And basically you can ask it to get some data from my database. But now I'm actually not going to ask it here directly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add these into the context and I'm going to ask the Copilot to do something else before. So what I'm going to ask, and there's a prompt for that here, this one. So I say, first fetch my top 5 holdings by weight. Then return the next 12 months PE ratio of those stocks by PE descending. Make sure you exclude the values and then merge the two data sets, return something like this. So it's super specific. But the interesting thing here is that my 5 top holdings, these ones, not all of them have actually the multiples available on this database. So it should be able to understand the ones that don't, and it should still be able to create like an artifact that can be added onto the dashboard. Let's see how well it performs. Perfect. That's exactly what we were looking for. So now what you can see is actually got the ticker, got the multiple value, and got the weight from above, which is perfect. So now I could actually add these onto the context here. And this is a table that I can then create charts if I'm interested in. So I could have like a multiple value, and then I could go on to the chart settings, and I want this one, for instance, and like this. So this is, for instance, an example of what you could have in the end if you wanted. Now, what's interesting here, and I'm going to show you, like we can validate the data, is that this has access to the database on its own. So if I were to do this, let's just copy this one, return the next 12 months PE ratio of all stocks sorted by PE descending, and I'm going to click run. It should run, and it should show me that, yep, we have all the stocks here that are on the specific database. And so he was able to do the join between data that lives here, that is coming live, that is eating an endpoint and that gets refreshed and updated, and is having access to data that lives on my Snowflake or any other database that you may have through this Omni widget. We're actually in the process of improving what this Omni widget looks like so that it can actually take on the logic from this SQL and create a widget that basically just triggers that SQL every time you're interacting with it, as opposed to just being like a static asset, which right now you can already create because you could create like a widget from this. Another thing I wanted to highlight here as well is the fact that once data is available on the workspace as a table, it becomes immediately available onto Excel as well. So here, for instance, I'm looking for portfolio one and portfolio units. I could also be looking at the company, but what I can do is I can go into Excel formula and I can copy this to clipboard. And then if I go onto my Excel, I can actually paste this here. And you'll see that it returns the data. Exactly like the workspace, which makes it really efficient if you want to transition onto an Excel. We also have these different mode, which I actually quite like, which is called explicit parameters. So it's kind of the same concept, but essentially instead of having it the parameters built in the formula, they appear separated. So now if I were to say, okay, I don't want portfolio one, I want portfolio two, you see that all the data gets refreshed to highlight that. Another one that I want to show you right now is we're going to go into a different app. And this one, I want to go to this one here, demonstration from C workflow. And so this is like a PDF widget, multi-viewer. So we can say we want minutes here. And so we're looking for the latest ones. But what I want to highlight this time is actually not our own Copilot, which I want to highlight. I'm going to clear it up. I want to highlight that you can bring your own custom agent. So you have the capability for users to actually connect with agents that they built. So this one is actually built on top of Gemini. And so now that you are here, I could do something like add this into context, and then I go into the prompt and I say, identify and summarize all statements about inflation, specifically quote me expected inflation in this document. And you can see that immediately you get like an output. It's really fast. It's running like Gemini as opposed to us. And like it has limited feature, this one, because it was just built to analyze the Form C document. So it doesn't process MCP. It doesn't have access to all the data on the widget library. It has access just to what it can see. It doesn't have access to the web. And so it's super targeted. And so this allows firms that have already built some agents or are already working with other startups that have specific agents to be able to integrate them into the workspace. Because we are really in the business of having this workspace infrastructure so you can connect any data to any agent, and the workflows or the process all happens within our infrastructure. So this is something I wanted to show. Then I also wanted to highlight how easy it is to add an application onto the workspace. And for that, the way I'm going to do it is there's someone on our team, Jose, that built this Polymarket app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially open this application here, and I'm going to go into this widgets.json. So widgets.json is our spec onto how the widget gets rendered into the workspace, essentially. And so you can see here that there's a widget called search events. There's another called search tags. There's another top events. This one actually has parameters. But the way you add it into workspace is actually super easy. So you connect backend. I'm going to call it Polymarket. I'm going to add the link. You can validate the widgets. I'm just going to say test. It's tested. It's added. It's available here. And then I open it. And that's it. It basically gets rendered because there was someone that built this on my behalf. And now it's available to the workspace. I can use AI on top of it. I can also get this data on Excel again. So I showed that earlier, but let's just show you with this now. I'm going to copy this one and I'm going to go into Excel. I'm just going to paste it here. And it becomes immediately available here. So this was just to show you like how easy it is to once someone builds an app that you can connect with. And now like this is like an open world, like all of the widgets that you had available before that you want to add. For instance, we were working with like price targets before, right? We're working with price targets here. For instance, you can see that I actually have several ones. And then you have it available like right here. You can also, for instance, if you see that things are grouped together, you can actually create the grouping mechanism here. So I can group these two together. So you can see that now they are literally pointed at the same, which doesn't really make sense because now it's the exact same widget, but you can do that grouping. And now let's say you wanted to resize things and then you wanted to move things around like this. And now let's say that this is your finalized app for some reason, you like how it looks. So now you could just go export apps.json. You could select like my polymarket app or something like that. And then essentially you build like an application that then you can host, which is essentially just the widgets.json spec and the apps.json, which basically tells you like what is the layout. And that's it. That's literally it. And so I'm going to go back onto this link here, and I'm actually going to show you the apps.json. And this is just the layout. And so it just tells you that, okay, in the first tab, we have overview. We're going to have like trending tags, ID widget there, the home cars, the top events. And this is all done through the UI. So it's super easy for users to do. Final thing I want to highlight. We have a new product that we've been building under the hood for the past few months, and it's called Open Data Platform. Essentially what it is a way to run the OpenBB platform, which is our open source project with over 50,000 GitHub stars. And essentially when you run it, you can have like an OpenBB environment, you install it on your machine, and then you can pretty much start using it directly, and you have access to data that goes through the Open Data Platform, which happens via the API keys. So you can have your API keys and then the data you fetch from the source, and there's some computation happening within the workspace OpenBB. For it to happen, you can have notebook, you can actually run the original OpenBB CLI terminal, you can have a notebook, a Python interpreter, and other environments. You could also have like MCP if you wanted, so you could use these to feed your agents with data like BLS, IMF, Congress, in specific like open public data sets, but could also be proprietary to you and your firm. But more importantly, you have this backend tab here. This backend tab allows you to run these executable with an OpenBB API, which then can be added onto the dashboard. And so what I wanted to show you is that you can actually look into the logs of these. And so right now, this is my latest log, which was just because I refreshed my backend. But if I go into the workspace and I click on thread here, and we can hide the left bar so it's more spacious, you can see that now it's triggered these two widgets because those are the ones available here. If I go on to, let's say, PCE, for instance, you'll see that there's a new endpoint that was triggered. And so it just shows you the logs of how we end up managing the data, but we're not storing it. We just end up being the router, the interface where that data is consumed and where real work happens. And so let's say that now you want to add, for instance, unemployment rate here. You can add it like this, and then I can maybe display it, and I want to hide the other one, so I just see unemployment rate. That's it. So now when you go here, you can actually see that the only call that really happened here was this one. And you can see that there's unemployment rate as the parameter that was sent. But that's it, that's it. And yeah, I think this concludes the demo. I showed most of what is possible within the workspace. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at didier.lopsch@openbb.finance, and I'll see you around.